In the rolling hills of Virginia, behind the whitewashed walls of a seemingly perfect farmhouse, 47 children were hidden in chains, forgotten by the world, trapped in a basement where no one could hear their cries. In the rolling hills of Virginia, in the year 1834, the Sullivan farmhouse stood like a picture plucked from a pastoral painting. Its whitewashed walls gleamed in the morning sun, framed by neatly trimmed hedges and a small orchard of apple trees whose blossoms swayed gently in the spring breeze. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, a signal to any passerby that within, the family went about their ordinary peaceful life. To the casual observer, the Sullivans seemed like the very embodiment of the American dream, a solid family, grounded in the rhythms of farm life. Children running through the fields, parents tending to chores with quiet diligence. Yet, beneath this veneer of serenity, something was deeply, profoundly wrong, though no one could have guessed just how dark the truth truly was. The father, Jonathan Sullivan, was a man of imposing stature. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with an authority that demanded attention, even respect from the neighbors who occasionally crossed the yard for a friendly visit. His eyes, sharp and calculating, missed nothing, scanning every inch of his property with a vigilance that some found admirable, others unnerving. There was a firmness in his jaw, a rigidity in his posture, that spoke of a man who demanded obedience not out of cruelty, but out of an unquestionable belief in his authority. And yet, that authority concealed a controlling, almost sinister streak, one that allowed him to keep the world at bay while maintaining a secret so horrifying that, if revealed, it would shatter the illusion of normalcy entirely. Beside him stood Mary Sullivan, his wife, a woman whose quiet, almost ethereal presence softened the edges of Jonathan's commanding demeanor. To outsiders, Mary seemed gentle, even nurturing, always ready with a kind word or a soft smile for the few visitors they allowed. But beneath that calm exterior lay a complicity that few could see, a silent acquiescence to her husband's strictness and eventually to the unimaginable horrors that would unfold in their basement. Her eyes, often downcast, reflected a mixture of fear and resignation, a woman trapped in a life dictated by her husband's iron will. Occasionally, a fleeting expression of sorrow would cross her face when she thought no one was watching, as if she too was mourning something the world would never know. The children of the Sullivan family were perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the household. When one looked at them from afar, they appeared ordinary enough, well-dressed, clean and seemingly healthy. Yet, a closer look revealed small, telling signs that all was not well. Their movements were cautious, almost rehearsed, as though any sudden action might draw punishment. They spoke in hushed tones, voices barely above whispers, and never played together in the open fields, even on the brightest of days. Their eyes, wide and wary, darted constantly toward the farmhouse windows, as if watching for unseen threats lurking in the shadows. To a casual observer, it might have seemed like mere shyness or timidity, but there was an unmistakable tension in every gesture, every glance, a quiet alarm that something terrible lay hidden behind the Sullivan walls. Visitors to the farmhouse were rare, and when they did come, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken caution. Jonathan greeted them with politeness, even warmth, masking the rigid control he exercised over his family. Mary offered tea and small talk, a smile unwavering, her tone soft, yet her hands trembled ever so slightly when pouring the drink. The children hovered in the corners, eyes downcast, never daring to interrupt or draw attention to themselves. There was a precision in their behavior, a synchronization that hinted at countless rehearsals of obedience, drills designed to conceal the reality of their existence from any prying eyes. And all the while the farmhouse seemed to breathe with secrets, each creaking floorboard and shadowed corner a silent witness to the horrors the family kept hidden from the world. Even the neighbors, those who had lived in the surrounding hills for decades, could sense that something was off, though they could never put their finger on it. The Sullivans rarely engaged in the social rituals of the community. They attended church only occasionally, exchanged pleasantries sparingly, and kept the children out of sight. Whispers circulated in hushed tones over fences and across markets. Some claimed to have seen a child peering nervously from a window at odd hours. Others spoke of strange, muffled cries carried on the wind in the dead of night. Yet no one dared confront Jonathan Sullivan for fear of his formidable presence, and perhaps deep down because they did not truly want to know what lay beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic family. Inside the house, the tension was almost tangible, an invisible weight pressing down on every corner. The rooms were meticulously kept, with polished wooden floors and neatly arranged furniture, yet the air carried a subtle undertone of dread. Children moved silently from room to room, carrying out their chores with mechanical precision. They avoided eye contact with their parents when possible, anticipating punishment for the smallest misstep. Even the laughter that occasionally escaped from the lips of the youngest seemed rehearsed, muted, as if they had been taught to smile without really feeling joy. Every corner of the Sullivan home told a story of fear disguised as discipline, of obedience demanded in the name of family unity, of a facade carefully maintained while the true reality festered in secret. The darkest and most mysterious part of the farmhouse was the basement. Locked and largely ignored, it was a place that Jonathan rarely spoke of, and the children were forbidden to enter. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a storage space, the kind of place where a family might keep barrels of preserves or tools for the farm. But the truth was far more sinister. Within those cold stone walls, a world existed that defied imagination, a place where innocence was chained, where laughter and light were replaced by despair and darkness. Yet even with such horror hidden beneath the house, the exterior remained unchanged, a beautiful, serene home that fooled every passerby and neighbor, reinforcing the tragic reality that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. Despite the terror that permeated the home, life went on in a distorted normalcy. Children performed tasks diligently, meals were prepared and consumed in silence, and the family went about their days with a frightening routine that masked the underlying cruelty. Jonathan's strict control was absolute, and Mary's quiet complicity allowed the dark cycle to continue unchecked. The house was both prison and stage, the children actors in a performance dictated by fear. Each movement calculated to avoid punishment, each glance measured to convey the obedience expected of them. For any outsider, the Sullivan family was a picture of order and tranquility. For those who lived within its walls, it was a nightmare cloaked in the familiar trappings of home. Even the sounds of the farm were part of this carefully maintained illusion. Chickens clucked in the yard, the wind rustled through the orchard, and the distant clatter of tools in the barn suggested the ordinary rhythm of rural life. Yet, amidst these comforting noises, there was a quiet, ever-present tension, the soft whimper of a child hidden away, the barely audible shuffle of feet moving cautiously on the floorboards, the muffled commands from Jonathan's stern voice. These subtle details went unnoticed by most, but they painted a vivid picture for anyone willing to look closer. A household where fear ruled as surely as the rising and setting of the sun, and where the facade of perfection masked horrors that the world could scarcely comprehend. As seasons changed, the exterior beauty of the Sullivan farmhouse only deepened the deception. Blossoms gave way to summer heat, autumn leaves fell in vibrant cascades, and winter snow blanketed the property in a quiet street. Illness. Each season reinforced the illusion of normalcy for outsiders, while the interior remained a place of silent torment. The children adapted to their world of shadows and obedience, growing stronger in body, yet more fragile in spirit, their innocence slowly eroded by the unrelenting control of their parents. And through it all, the neighbors, the community, and even the occasional visitor continued to marvel at the picturesque family, unaware that beneath the polished surface of the farmhouse lay a nightmare that no one could have imagined. It was in this unsettling juxtaposition, the serene beauty of the farmhouse, the outward perfection of the family, and the hidden horror that awaited in the basement, that the story of the Sullivan children truly began. The stage was set for a revelation that would shock an entire community, a story that would haunt Virginia for decades to come, and a tale that demanded to be remembered not for the calm exterior of the house, but for the suffering that had unfolded behind its closed doors. The Sullivans had mastered the art of deception, presenting a family that seemed ordinary, while hiding a secret so dark, so incomprehensible, that it would leave the world in disbelief. And it all started, innocuously enough, with a charming farmhouse in the rolling hills of Virginia, where appearances were everything, and the truth was a nightmare waiting patiently in the shadows. Even in a small rural community, secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks, carried by whispers, hushed conversations, and lingering glances. The Sullivan family, so carefully cloaked in the guise of normalcy, could not entirely escape the notice of those who lived nearby. At first it was subtle, almost dismissible, a child peeking nervously from behind a curtain, eyes wide and fearful, retreating at the slightest sound. A young girl carrying a bucket of water would hurry across the yard, head down, shoulders hunched as if she bore a weight far greater than her years. To the casual observer, these might have seemed like mere shyness or natural timidity, but for those who knew the Sullivan family well, a creeping unease began to take hold, an instinctive sense that something was horribly wrong behind the polished doors of the farmhouse. The neighbors noticed patterns, the small but persistent signs that no ordinary family could hide. The Sullivan children were rarely seen in the open, and when they did venture outside, it was only briefly, as if a silent command had been issued: appear, perform, vanish. They never played in the fields, never laughed in the sun, and never approached other children. Some townsfolk recalled instances when one child would dart across the yard, glancing repeatedly over their shoulder, as though anticipating a punishment that could strike without warning. The adults in the community whispered amongst themselves, sharing their observations in muted tones at the market or behind fences. "Have you seen the bee?" "Oi?" one would ask. "He hasn't been outside all week." And the youngest, "I thought she was sick, but I saw her yesterday, and she was carrying a pail of water. She looked afraid." No one dared confront Jonathan Sullivan directly. His presence was imposing, his temper rumored to be unforgiving. Yet the neighbors felt compelled to talk, compelled to share their unease in a world where ignoring instinctive dread was nearly impossible. At gatherings there were fleeting moments of shared understanding, subtle nods and furtive glances toward the farmhouse across the rolling fields. Some claimed to have heard strange noises at night, soft sobs, faint whimpers, the muted scrape of movement in rooms that were supposedly empty. The community collectively shivered at the thought, exchanging uneasy words over warm hearths and wagons full of produce. Even the local minister, a man of reason and faith, found himself troubled. When passing the Sullivan home on his Sunday visits, he noted that the children never approached him, never participated in the hymns, and seemed perpetually on edge. It was as if the very walls of the farmhouse had been built to contain fear itself. As time passed, the signs became harder to dismiss. Occasionally a child would be sent to town for errands, moving quickly and silently, eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding the gaze of any adult who might offer kindness. They would return, carrying parcels or goods, always with a strange mechanical obedience, yet leaving behind an impression of dread and fragility. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, recalled seeing a boy standing on the edge of the orchard one evening, watching the sunset with an intensity that was almost unnatural. When she called out to him, he flinched violently, darting into the shadows of the house as if being caught in some transgression. It was a moment that haunted her, a glimpse into a world she could not understand and did not wish to probe further. Rumors began to circulate more freely, though always whispered, never shouted. "I heard the basement door creak at night," one man said, his voice low, almost reverent in its fear. "And the children, they never enter that room. I don't know what's down there, but it isn't right." Another neighbor nodded grimly, adding, "I saw one of the older children carrying something heavy, wrapped in a cloth. They dropped it near the door, then ran inside like they'd been caught." These snippets of observation created a patchwork of suspicion and horror, but without proof they remained mere speculation. a growing unease that hung over the community like a storm cloud waiting to break. The children themselves were a testament to a life lived under constant surveillance and control. Even when outside, their behavior was precise, their gestures almost robotic. They moved in unison at times, as if guided by invisible strings, their eyes scanning for any sign of displeasure from their parents. Those rare moments when a child had eye contact with a neighbor were fleeting and filled with an expression of silent plea, a muted request for help that could not be spoken aloud. Their fear was palpable, a tangible presence that lingered in the air, infecting anyone who observed them too closely. The older children carried themselves with a strange mixture of obedience and suppressed rebellion, hinting at the inner torment that lay hidden beneath their composed exteriors. The adults in the community began to piece together the fragments of what they suspected. A neighbor who had occasionally helped with farm work noticed the children seemed unusually thin, despite the family's apparent wealth. Clothes, though neat, were worn and ill-fitting, and there was a pallor to their faces that could not be explained by sunlight or diet alone. The house, while outwardly perfect, began to feel oppressive in the imagination of those who lived nearby. Even the wind seemed to carry warnings, rustling the orchard leaves in a whisper that mimicked the cries of the children they could not see. There was an instinctive understanding that something terrible was being concealed, yet no one had the courage to confront it directly. Some of the neighbors attempted small acts of kindness, offering food or sweets, hoping to ease the children's lives in some minor way. These gestures were met with hesitation, fear, and occasional rejection. The children would look at the gifts, their eyes flickering with a mix of longing and terror. Before hastily returning to the house under the watchful eyes of Jonathan and Mary Sullivan. Even such brief interactions carried a weight of tension, leaving the neighbors with a growing sense of helplessness. They understood, on some instinctive level, that the children were prisoners, yet the extent of their captivity remained unfathomable. The children's isolation was compounded by the physical boundaries imposed by the farmhouse itself. The basement, though rarely accessed, cast a long shadow of dread over the household. Its presence was known to the children, who avoided it at all costs, and to the neighbors, who sometimes caught glimpses of a locked door, heavy and forbidding, that seemed to hum with secrets. Occasionally faint sounds would escape, a scrape, a thud, a muffled sob, and the neighbors would exchange fearful glances, imagining horrors that were almost too much to comprehend. They wanted to intervene, to call the authorities, but the remoteness of the farm, the intimidating presence of Jonathan Sullivan, and their own fear kept them at bay. The children were trapped in every sense, bound not only by chains they could not see, but by a system of fear and silence that the world outside could not penetrate. Even with these observations, there were moments when hope flickered. Some of the children would show glimpses of normal curiosity, a bird perched on a fence, a butterfly fluttering past, a patch of sunlight falling across the orchard. They would follow these small wonders with a tentative interest, their faces lighting up for an instant before the shadow of fear returned. These moments reminded the neighbors that the children were still human, still capable of joy. Yet they were fleeting, fragile sparks extinguished too quickly by the oppressive weight of the household. It was this contrast, the fragile light of innocence struggling against a dark, suffocating reality, that made the situation so heart-wrenching, so impossible to ignore even from a distance. As the months passed, the whispers grew louder, the fear more urgent, and the neighbors' observations more detailed. They began to compare notes, sharing everything they had noticed, from the way a child flinched at a sudden movement to the peculiar hush that fell over the household whenever someone approached the farmhouse. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were slowly being assembled, yet no one had the courage, or perhaps the means, to confront the truth. The children remained trapped in their silent, obedient world, their suffering unnoticed by the very society that should have protected them. And then there were the nights when the darkness seemed to carry the children's plight in its folds. Those who lived nearby sometimes heard faint, agonized cries drifting through the still air, cries that spoke of hunger, fear, and isolation. Windows rattled in the cold wind, leaves rustled across the empty fields, and the house itself seemed to thrum with a hidden life. The Neeg spores lay awake in their beds, hearts pounding, minds racing with what they imagined might be occurring behind those closed doors. It was a collective unease, a shared dread that grew day by day, fueled by observation, rumor, and intuition. Yet, for all the hints, for all the whispers and half-glimpsed signs, no one truly knew the scale of the horror that awaited discovery. The basement, the hidden prison, the source of so much suffering, remained invisible, obscured by the facade of normalcy. The neighbors could sense the danger, feel it in the way the children moved, in the hush that fell over the farmhouse, in the small, haunting details that spoke louder than any words ever could. The story was building, tension mounting like a gathering storm, and the inevitable moment of revelation loomed closer with every passing day. The whispers of hidden horror, subtle and persistent, became the heartbeat of the neighborhood's anxiety. Each new observation, each unexplained behavior, each muffled sound added another layer to the growing fear. The children were prisoners of a secret that no one could fully see, yet everyone felt. And as the seasons turned and the community's unease deepened, the stage was set for the moment when the truth could no longer be contained, a moment that would shock, horrify, and leave an indelible mark on the history of Virginia and the hearts of all who would hear the story. The day of discovery began like any other, with the soft glow of morning light, spilling across the rolling hills of Virginia, illuminating the Sullivan farmhouse in its deceptive serenity. From the outside, the house looked unchanged, its whitewashed walls bright against the sky, smoke curling from the chimney, and the orchard swaying gently in the spring breeze. Yet inside, a dark, suffocating secret waited, hidden beneath layers of obedience, fear, and meticulous concealment. No one could have anticipated the horror that lay behind the locked basement door, yet when the truth finally emerged, it would shake the very foundations of the small community and haunt those who bore witness for years to come. It started with a neighbor, Mr. Caldwell, a farmer who had lived down the road for decades. He had noticed the whispers, the strange glances of children, and the hushed conversations that seemed to follow the Sullivan family wherever they went. For months, unease had grown inside him, a gnawing sensation that something was horribly wrong, and on that morning, driven by curiosity and an urgency he could no longer ignore, he decided to act. With a mix of trepidation and resolve, he made his way up the familiar dirt path to the farmhouse, each step accompanied by the crunch of gravel and the muted chirping of birds that somehow made the approaching horror even more surreal. The front door, though solid and imposing, offered no indication of what lay within. Jonathan Sullivan greeted Mr. Caldwell with a polite nod and a courteous good morning, his voice calm and measured, belying the tension that would erupt if any misstep was made. Mary Sullivan appeared from the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral, hands folded, the corners of her mouth turned in a practiced, reassuring smile. The children lingered silently in the background, their eyes darting toward the adults, as if aware that something monumental was about to unfold. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, a quiet that pressed down like a weight, warning that this was no ordinary day, no ordinary visit. Mr. Caldwell's attention, however, was drawn to the basement door, a heavy, dark wooden barrier tucked away in the corner of the kitchen. It had always been locked, and no one had been permitted to enter. But today, the door seemed to beckon, a silent siren calling him to uncover the truth. He reached for the latch, hand trembling ever so slightly, aware that this simple action could reveal something beyond imagination. With a click that echoed unnervingly in the stillness, the door swung open, and the air that poured out was thick, heavy, and foul. A stench unlike anything he had encountered filled his lungs, a mixture of rot, decay, and neglect that forced him to stagger back, hand covering his mouth. It was a smell that spoke of suffering endured in silence, of lives hidden away from the world, and of horrors that could no longer remain contained. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, the true scale of the nightmare revealed itself. Chained to the cold saint, One walls were children, 47 of them, ranging from infants to teenagers, their bodies emaciated, faces pale and eyes wide with terror. They huddled together in clusters, some rocking back and forth, others pressing against the wall in silent despair. Their hair was matted, clothes torn and filthy, and their skin bore the marks of neglect and abuse. The chains that bound them clinked softly as they shifted, a cruel reminder of the physical restraint that had confined them for years. Every detail of their captivity was a testament to unimaginable suffering: empty bowls, scraps of tattered blankets, and the faint scrawls of desperate messages etched into the stone walls where children had attempted to leave a trace of their existence. Shock paralyzed Mr. Caldwell for a moment. He had heard rumors, he had sensed something was wrong, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer, trying to reassure himself that he had not stumbled into a nightmarish hallucination. The children's eyes followed him, wide with disbelief and terror, as though they had never dared hope that anyone would come to release them. Some whispered, barely audibly, "Please, help us. Don't leave," while others simply stared, frozen in a state of stunned recognition that freedom might finally be within reach. The room seemed to close in around him, the darkness pressing from every corner. Mr. Caldwell noticed the meticulous cruelty in every detail. The chains were not haphazard, but carefully placed to restrict movement, to prevent escape. The children were positioned in such a way that even the smallest act of rebellion would be immediately punished. The air itself seemed laden with despair, heavy and suffocating, as if absorbing every ounce of life that had passed through the basement. The scale of Jonathan Sullivan's cruelty became apparent. In the moment, this was not the act of a single incident, but a carefully orchestrated system of imprisonment, maintained over years with ruthless precision. Word spread quickly once the discovery was made. The sheriff and several townspeople arrived within hours, each step up the path punctuated by a mix of dread and disbelief. The adults were met with the same suffocating stench, the same sight of children chained to the walls in unimaginable conditions. As the officials moved through the basement, their hearts sank at every turn, their minds struggling to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the horror. 47 children, all hidden away, all suffering in silence, each one a testament to the depths of human cruelty and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable oppression. The rescue itself was a delicate, harrowing process. Chains had to be removed carefully, not only to free the children but to prevent further injury. Many of them were weak from malnutrition, their bones fragile and their muscles wasted from years of confinement. Each child was lifted into the light of day for the first time in what felt like an eternity, their eyes squinting against the brightness, their bodies trembling from exposure and relief. Some cried uncontrollably, tears mingling with dirt and grime, while others remained silent, too stunned to react, their minds still trapped in the dark confines of the basement that had been their world for so long. As the children were led outside, the contrast between the light of the day and the darkness of their captivity could not have been more stark. Birds sang, the wind rustled through the orchard, and sunlight danced across the rolling hills, all innocent, normal, beautiful, yet every element of the natural world now bore witness to the consequences of human cruelty. The children, many for the first time, felt the warmth of sunlight on their faces, the gentle caress of a breeze, the soft grass beneath their feet. It was a moment of sensory overwhelm, a sudden flood of stimuli that their bodies and minds had been denied for years. Their reactions were varied. Some laughed quietly, a whisper of joy reborn. Others screamed in terror, unsure how to exist in a world they had been taught to fear, and many simply stood still, absorbing the reality that they were no longer trapped, yet still carrying the weight of every day they had suffered. The adults around them were equally affected. Even the most stoic officers and neighbors could not mask their horror at what they had uncovered. Tears flowed freely. Hands shook, and hearts ached at the sight of so much suffering concentrated in one place. Questions were immediate, urgent, and unanswerable. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? How could one family inflict such cruelty without intervention? And, perhaps most painfully, how would the children ever recover from the trauma they had endured? Every glance, every whispered word, every small gesture carried the weight of a collective grief that permeated the air. Inside the farmhouse, Jonathan and Mary Sullivan were confronted for the first time with the consequences of their actions. Jonathan's stoic demeanor faltered under scrutiny. His authority diminished in the face of undeniable evidence. Mary's silent complicity was laid bare, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, shame, and resignation. They could no longer hide behind the facade of the perfect family. The community's judgment, and more importantly the truth, had exposed their darkest deeds. In that moment, the farmhouse, once a symbol of outward normalcy, became a monument to human cruelty, its walls bearing witness to decades of suffering and concealment. The emotional impact of the discovery rippled far beyond the boundaries of the Sullivan farm. The children, now free, faced a long, uncertain journey toward healing. Authorities worked tirelessly to provide care, nutrition, and medical attention, yet the psychological scars remained. Each child carried memories of fear, deprivation, and isolation that not easily fade. Even as they experienced the simple joys of freedom, sunlight, laughter, food, warmth, there was a lingering shadow, a reminder of the basement that had been both home and prison. The story of the Sullivan family became a cautionary tale, a shocking testament to the depths of human cruelty and the resilience required to endure it. News of the discovery spread rapidly, leaving the entire community in shock. Neighbors who had whispered suspicions now grappled with the magnitude of the reality they had only glimpsed. Scholars, officials, and clergy alike reflected on the tragedy, pondering how such horrors could exist in a society that prided itself on morality, family, and faith. The basement, once hidden, became a symbol, a grim reminder that appearances can deceive, that innocence can be concealed by fear, and that courage is sometimes found in the willingness to confront the unimaginable. Even years later, the memory of that day endured. Those who witnessed the rescue carried the images in their minds: the chained children, the squalid basement, the overwhelming stench, and the light of day that finally set them free. It was a story that demanded remembrance, not for the sake of shame, but to honor the resilience of the children, to acknowledge the suffering that had been hidden, and to ensure that the lessons learned from the Sullivan family would echo across generations. The day the Sullivan children were freed, the world seemed to shift slightly on its axis. As if the sunlight that spilled over the Virginia hills carried with it a new fragile hope. Yet even in the brightness of day, the weight of years of suffering pressed heavily upon the children, each step away from the basement a tentative, fearful act. Their bodies, frail and weakened from malnutrition and confinement, trembled with exhaustion, and every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant crowing of a rooster, the whisper of wind through the orchard, seemed amplified, unfamiliar, and even threatening. For 47 children who had never known freedom, the world outside their prison was at once exhilarating and terrifying, a paradox that would shape their recovery for years to come. The rescue teams worked tirelessly, their focus on providing immediate care. Blankets were wrapped around trembling shoulders, hands gently guided, and food offered in small, careful portions to prevent shock. The children, whose bodies had been starved for nutrition, approached the offerings with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. Some reached eagerly for the food, eyes lighting up at the sight of nourishment after so long without, while others hesitated, uncertain whether this kindness might conceal punishment. It was a delicate balance between relief and distrust, a dance of instinct and learned fear, and every moment required patience, understanding, and immense empathy. Medical attention was immediate and urgent. Doctors examined the children, noting the signs of cruelty. See malnutrition, protruding ribs, frail limbs, and sunken eyes that seemed to hold centuries of suffering. Many bore scars, both physical and emotional, from years of confinement and abuse. Cuts, bruises, and sores were meticulously tended to, but the deeper wounds, the ones etched into their hearts and minds, were far more challenging. Psychologists and caregivers who observed them noted the vacant stares, the startled reflex at sudden movements, and the inability to speak freely about experiences that had been forbidden to them. For many, the trauma was so ingrained that laughter and joy were foreign concepts, as unfamiliar as sunlight to someone who had known only shadows. Even as care was provided, the children's reactions were as varied as their ages. Infants and toddlers, who had never experienced consistent warmth or affection, clung to anyone who offered kindness, their small hands grasping desperately for reassurance. Older children, those who had spent years understanding the boundaries of obedience and fear, often recoiled, their instincts telling them that every new gesture might conceal danger. Some whispered in hushed tones to each other, sharing fragments of memories, while others remained silent, staring blankly into the distance as if the light of day was too much to bear. Every reaction was a testament to resilience and terror intertwined, the human spirit struggling to reconcile newfound freedom with decades of oppression. The community's response was overwhelming, a mixture of horror, grief, and a desperate desire to help. Neighbors who had once whispered rumors now found themselves face to face with the undeniable reality. Tears flowed freely as adults embraced children who had once been silent shadows in the fields, and hands that had trembled in suspicion now offered comfort, warmth, and protection. The farmhouse, once a symbol of deception and cruelty, became the center of a collective reckoning, as neighbors, authorities, and clergy alike struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. Questions abounded. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? How could a family inflict such suffering on so many? And, most painfully, how would the children ever recover? The children's first nights of freedom were fraught with difficulty. Accustomed to darkness and confinement, the sounds of a normal home, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of curtains, the soft chatter of caregivers, were overwhelming. Some cried themselves to sleep, haunted by memories of the basement, while others remained motionless, unable to trust that they were truly safe. Caregivers spoke softly, telling stories, offering gentle reassurances, and holding hands to bridge the chasm of fear that had defined their young lives. Each night was a careful negotiation between comfort and patience, between allowing the children space and drawing them into the warmth and light they had been denied for so long. In the days that followed, the children began to show small signs of adaptation. They marveled at the sky, the vast expanse of blue that stretched beyond the farmhouse, the wind whispering through trees that seemed impossibly alive. They tentatively explored the orchard, feeling the soft grass beneath their feet and the sun on their faces, a sensory experience that was both foreign and exhilarating. Their laughter, fragile and tentative at first, began to emerge in short bursts, startling both themselves and the adults around them. Every moment of joy was precious, a small victory against the years of fear that had sought to suppress it. Yet trauma is not easily undone. Many children struggled with nightmares, reliving the horrors of the basement in vivid detail. Some recoiled at sudden movements or loud noises, instinctively expecting punishment. Others displayed extreme caution in every action, hesitant to trust the adults who now sought to care for them. Psychologists working with the children emphasized the need for patience, understanding, and continuity, recognizing that recovery would be a long and difficult journey. Every step forward required reassurance, every smile earned through gentle persistence, and every act of trust a victory against years of learned fear. The aftermath also revealed the complexity of the children's relationships with one another. Having endured captivity together, they shared bonds forged in suffering, a connection that was both comforting and fraught. Some clung to siblings or friends for security, while others sought solitude, attempting to process freedom in their own way. Caregivers had to navigate these dynamics carefully, ensuring that each child's emotional needs were met while fostering a sense of community and support. The process of reintroducing them to normal human interactions was painstaking yet crucial, as it laid the foundation for eventual healing and reintegration into society. Meanwhile, the broader community grappled with its collective guilt and responsibility. Those who had suspected something was wrong wrestled with the knowledge that, despite intuition and observation, they had failed to act sooner. Conversations around morality, vigilance, and accountability flourished in the aftermath, as townspeople reflected on the ways in which fear, deference, and social norms had allowed the Sullivans' cruelty to persist. Schools, churches, and local authorities examined their practices, questioning how a tragedy of such magnitude could have unfolded in plain sight. It was a moment of reckoning, not only for the Sullivan family, but for the entire community, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, trust, and responsibility. The legal response followed swiftly, though even the law struggled to grasp the full scope of the situation. Jonathan and Mary Sullivan were held accountable for their actions, but the focus remained primarily on the children, their care, recovery, and eventual reintegration. Social workers and medical professionals coordinated efforts to place the children in safe environments, provide education, and address their physical and psychological needs. The process was slow, meticulous, and emotionally taxing, as the adults responsible for their welfare sought to undo, as much as possible, the damage inflicted over years of imprisonment. Public reaction was intense. Newspapers and pamphlets carried the story across Virginia and beyond, shocking readers with the sheer scale of the horror. 47 children, hidden in chains within a family home, became a symbol of human cruelty and resilience. Authors and preachers debated the morality of the act, historians documented the details, and ordinary citizens grappled with a mixture of horror and compassion. The children, though central to the narrative, became emblematic of survival and hope, illustrating that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit could endure. Over time, subtle signs of recovery emerged. Children began to express themselves more freely, speaking about experiences they had previously kept silent. They learned to trust adults, to engage in play, to enjoy small pleasures that had been denied for years. Education became a cornerstone of their rehabilitation, a pathway toward understanding the world outside the confines of fear. With each new skill, each word learned, and each day survived in freedom, the children reclaimed pieces of the humanity that had been systematically stripped from them. Yet even as progress was made, the shadows of the past lingered. Memories of chains, darkness, hunger, and fear haunted dreams and waking moments alike. Some children would suddenly freeze, gripped by flashbacks of their confinement. Others avoided enclosed spaces, reluctant to step into rooms with locked doors. Caregivers recognized these triggers and developed strategies to ease anxiety, offering reassurance and slowly rebuilding a sense of safety. The healing process, while slow and painstaking, became a testament to resilience, patience, and the enduring capacity for hope even in the wake of profound suffering. In the broader community, the Sullivan case became a catalyst for change. Authorities and social institutions re-evaluated their approaches to child welfare, ensuring that no family could wield absolute control over vulnerable children without oversight. Schools and churches increased vigilance, neighbors became more attentive, and society at large began to recognize the importance of intervention, compassion, and accountability. The story of the Sullivan children, while rooted in tragedy, sparked a cultural awareness that extended far beyond the boundaries of the Virginia hills, reminding all who heard it of the imperative to protect the innocent and speak out against injustice. Through all the pain, confusion, and trauma, the children gradually began to experience the simplest joys that had once been unimaginable, running freely through the fields, feeling the warmth of the sun on their skin, tasting fresh food, hearing laughter without fear, and learning that kindness did not always conceal cruelty. Each small victory became monumental, a declaration of life over oppression, freedom over confinement, and hope over despair. Caregivers documented every step of progress, recognizing that the children's journey from darkness to light was not only a personal triumph, but a historical testament to the endurance of the human spirit. By the time the first anniversary of their rescue arrived, the transformation was remarkable, though not complete. The children had gained weight, strength, and resilience, yet their eyes still carried echoes of the basement's shadows. Conversations with caregivers revealed progress in emotional intelligence, socialization, and trust building. The community had rallied to provide support, fostering a network of love and protection that the Sullivans had systematically denied. What had begun as a rescue fraught with horror and uncertainty had evolved into a story of hope, recovery, and the power of human connection to heal even the deepest wounds. Years had passed since the dark revelation of the Sullivan farmhouse, yet the echoes of that horror lingered like a shadow stretching far beyond the hills of Virginia. The community, once quiet and suspicious, had become a living repository of memory, carrying the story of 47 children who had been chained in a basement, hidden from the world. Even as the landscape changed with the passing of seasons, the orchard still swayed in the wind, and the farmhouse remained a silent sentinel. It bore witness to a truth that could never be erased. Appearances could be deceiving, innocence could be stolen, and human cruelty, when left unchecked, could reach unimaginable depths. Yet amid this darkness, there was a story of hope, survival, and the resilience of the human spirit, a story that demanded to be remembered not for the shame it invoked, but for the lessons it imparted. The children who survived the Sullivan basement were now older, their bodies stronger, their minds shaped by both trauma and newfound freedom. The process of reclaiming life was painstaking. Simple acts that most took for granted, running through the fields, laughing freely, expressing emotions without fear, had to be relearned, nurtured, and celebrated. Yet in each small triumph, the traces of resilience were undeniable. Their survival was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to human endurance even in the face of prolonged deprivation and cruelty. Some of the children grew into adulthood carrying the memory of chains on their wrists, but also the knowledge that they had endured the unendurable. This duality of suffering and strength became their defining feature, a silent legacy passed down through stories, memories, and the unbreakable bonds they had formed with one another in captivity. As the survivors integrated into society, their stories began to shape broader conversations about child welfare, protection, and accountability. Local authorities, once slow to act, now recognized the necessity of vigilance and oversight. Laws and social practices were gradually influenced by the tragedy, creating safeguards designed to prevent such atrocities from recurring. Schools incorporated awareness into their curriculum, clergy emphasized moral responsibility, and neighbors became more attuned to the signs of hidden suffering. The Sullivan case became a cautionary tale, a historical example that even in seemingly idyllic communities, darkness could fester unnoticed and intervention could be a matter of life or death. Despite these societal shifts, the emotional scars carried by the children were profound and enduring. Nightmares persisted for many, vivid recollections of darkness, hunger, and the cold stone walls of the basement. Sudden movements, enclosed spaces, and the sound of chains clinking triggered involuntary fear responses. Caregivers and psychologists devoted themselves to healing, offering therapy, reassurance, and patience, knowing that the process would be lifelong. Yet even within this struggle, glimmers of hope shone through. The children learned to trust again, to speak of their experiences without fear, to form friendships that were not dictated by survival but by affection. Each milestone, no matter how small, was a victory against the years of oppression they had endured. The community itself could not forget. The farmhouse, still standing, became a symbol both feared and revered. While many suggested that it be demolished to erase the memory, others argued that its preservation was essential, a tangible reminder of the fragility of innocence and the consequences of turning a blind eye. Over time, the home became a historical site, not as a place of shame, but as a testament to human resilience and a memorial to those who had suffered in silence. Visitors, historians, and descendants meet to witness the orchard, the faded whitewashed walls, and the basement that had housed so much despair. They came not to sensationalize, but to remember, to reflect, and to ensure that the lessons learned would echo across generations. The story of the Sullivan children also carried an emotional weight for the wider society, one that transcended the immediate locality. Newspapers, letters and journals recounted the events with a mix of horror and reverence, ensuring that the story would not fade with time. Scholars debated the psychological and sociological implications, focusing on the resilience of the children and the systemic failures that allowed such cruelty to persist. Artists, writers, and storytellers captured the narrative in words and images, not to exploit, but to explore the human capacity for both evil and endurance. Each retelling, while different in style, carried the same emotional resonance, the balance between darkness and light, despair and hope, oppression and liberation. The emotional legacy extended into the private lives of the survivors. Many found solace in forging families of their own, creating homes where love, safety and joy were abundant. Others dedicated themselves to advocacy, seeking to prevent the repetition of such horrors in their own lifetimes. The memory of the basement, of the chains, and of the years spent in silence never fully left them, yet it became a source of purpose, a reminder of what had been endured and what must be safe. Guarded for future generations, their experiences imbued them with empathy, resilience, and a determination to nurture life in ways that their captors had denied them. Even as decades passed, the Sullivan case continued to shape local culture and consciousness. The story was passed from neighbor to neighbor, parent to child, teacher to student, not as gossip, but as moral instruction. It served as a warning about the dangers of blind compliance, the necessity of vigilance, and the profound responsibility each individual holds toward the vulnerable. It reminded communities that appearances could mask unspeakable horrors, that the quietest voices often required the loudest attention, and that courage was sometimes found in the willingness to act despite fear. The basement itself, long a symbol of despair, became a space for reflection. Though it remained a dark, cold room, its significance shifted from a site of cruelty to one of remembrance. Visitors would walk cautiously among the remnants, imagining the lives of children constrained by chains, contemplating the resilience required to survive, and leaving with a renewed sense of responsibility to protect the innocent. The walls bore silent testimony, etched with the memory of suffering, yet also a reminder that darkness can be illuminated, that oppression can be overcome, and that human spirit endures even in the face of unimaginable adversity. The emotional resonance of the story was amplified by the contrasts it presents. Outside, the world thrived in ordinary beauty. Sunlight filtered through trees, birds sang, and seasons turned in their natural rhythm. Inside the minds of survivors, memories of fear, hunger, and confinement coexisted with the joy of discovery, the warmth of affection, and the exhilaration of freedom. This duality became the defining legacy of the Sullivan children, a life shaped by both horror and hope, darkness and light, despair and resilience. Every laugh, every whispered conversation, every act of kindness became monumental, a testament to what had been endured and what had been reclaimed. Communities beyond Virginia drew lessons from the Sullivan case as well. Scholars, reformers, and social activists studied the circumstances, examining societal failings, parental authority, and the mechanisms that allowed abuse to remain hidden. Policies were slowly introduced to monitor child welfare, enforce educational attendance, and ensure that no child could be left in isolation without oversight. The story of 47 children chained in a basement became a moral touchstone, a benchmark against which society measured its progress in protecting those who could not protect themselves. For the children, the legacy was deeply personal. Survivors carried it as both a burden and a badge of resilience. In moments of reflection, they would remember the terror, the chains, and the endless days of darkness, but also the first rays of sunlight on their faces, the feeling of soft grass beneath their feet, the tentative warmth of human touch, and the realization that they had endured. These memories shaped their identities, influencing choices, relationships, and their sense of purpose in life. Many became advocates, educators, and caretakers, using their experience to guide and protect others. ensuring that the lessons of their suffering were never lost. Even the children who struggled most profoundly with their trauma became symbols of endurance. Some wrestled with fear, anxiety, and the inability to trust, yet each act of courage, stepping into sunlight, speaking freely, embracing a stranger's kindness, represented a victory over the years of oppression they had endured. Caregivers and neighbors observed these moments with awe, recognizing the incredible strength required to reclaim life after such profound suffering. The story of their survival, quietly unfolding in daily acts of resilience, became as compelling as the initial discovery, a reminder that hope and courage often emerge in the most unassuming moments. Ultimately, the legacy of the Sullivan family case lies not only in the horror of what occurred, but in the enduring lesson it imparts, that human cruelty can exist in hidden corners, that suffering can remain unseen if people do not act, and that resilience, empathy, and courage are among the most powerful tools for overcoming darkness. The story teaches that vigilance, compassion, and moral courage are essential in safeguarding the vulnerable, and that even in the darkest situations, light can emerge, often unexpected ways. The farmhouse, the orchard, and the basement remain, quietly standing as witnesses to history. Each visitor who walks those grounds feels the weight of memory, the echo of chains, and the enduring lesson of resilience. The story of the Sullivan children is not just one of horror, but of survival, strength, and hope. It is a narrative that transcends time, speaking to the human capacity for endurance, the necessity of vigilance, and the transformative power of compassion. Even decades later, people remember the 47 children, not as victims alone, but as symbols of survival and perseverance. They remind us that history carries lessons not only for those who witness it firsthand, but for generations yet to come. Their story is one that shocks, disturbs, and ultimately inspires, urging us to confront cruelty wherever it may hide, to act where action is needed, and to honor the resilience of those who have endured the unimaginable. The Sullivan basement may remain empty now, but the legacy of those children fills every heart that listens, a testament to the power of hope, memory, and human courage that can never be chained.